Hello, welcome to our lightning talk on fairness in AI, how algorithmic approaches can guide AI governance. My name is Shaun, and I'm a data scientist at the Government Technology Agency.
My name is Zhen, and I'm a state counsel with the Attorney General's Chambers. Please note that all views expressed in this lightning talk are our personal views and do not represent the views of our respective organizations.
So before we delve into fairness in AI, it's often useful to think about the opposite, in this case, that's bias. Here we give two examples, one of Apple Card, which gave this guy 20 times the credit limit of his wife, even though his wife had a higher credit score, and they have filed joint tax returns for the past 10 years together. In the second example, we have a recidivism predictive algorithm, which was found to be potentially biased against Black defendants because it was more likely to incorrectly flag Black defendants as high risk, especially when compared to white defendants. The worrying part is that this algorithm was used for parole and sentencing decisions, which meant that it had a real impact on these defendants and how often they stay in jail and whether or not they get released early. So with these two examples only cover really the tip of the iceberg. There are plenty of other examples of AI and bias, and we could have filled this entire slide with examples and we wouldn't have covered all of them. And that makes it even more important that we start thinking about what bias in AI is and how we can tackle it. We think that bias in AI needs to be tackled today. Access to many important socioeconomic opportunities, like the ones we talked about in the previous slide, such as access to credit cards, to credit in general, and even your ability to be released from prison a little bit earlier due to good behavior. All of these things are important decisions, and AI is already part of that decision-making process. Beyond those two examples, AI is already used in processing job applications and even expediting the interview process. Some candidates now do video recordings of their interviews, and these video recordings are fed into an AI model to assess how they perform. And if we see some kind of bias in that process, that's also an incredibly worrying development. The last one, obviously, is medical resourcing and prioritization, especially in the United States. There have been some studies that found that there are racial disparities in the accuracy of the model, and these are also concerning developments that we have to look into. The bottom line here is this, that if we don't act quickly, these harms can be very significant, and they can also be irreversible. And this is why we need to move fast and start thinking and deliberating and managing the risk of bias in AI today. One useful analogy that we like to use is to think of fairness in AI like safety for cars. If we think of AI algorithms as blueprints, algorithms produce models, and very much like how blueprints produce goods like cars. So we design cars to move people from point A to point B. And that's really the main reason why we have cars in the first place. But even though there's that primary objective, we also design cars to be safe. None of us would want to get into an old rickety car that looks like it's going to fall apart halfway on its trip. We want these cars to be safe, even if it doesn't help the car to drive faster. And sometimes, even when it makes the car less efficient, because we're adding all these safety features to the car. Why is that the case? That's because safety is important to us, even if it compromises a little bit on the primary objective of moving people from point A to point B. Similarly, we think that for AI, a lot of us want AI because it helps us to improve how we do things today. It's through the accuracy that we derive value from AI algorithms and AI models. However, we may also want our AI models to be fair in the same way that we want cars to be safe, even at the expense of some accuracy. And that's really the perspective that we're taking today and bringing into the research, especially in the world of algorithmic fairness. Algorithmic fairness, now that I'll explain it, is a subfield within a broader category of machine learning and computer science that seeks to develop algorithmic approaches to design fairness constraints into AI algorithms. This is very much like our analogy, on designing safety into the production blueprints for a car. In this lightning talk, we're just going to focus on AI-driven decision making, where the impact and the harm of bias in AI is going to be a bit more direct. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other ways for AI bias to cause harm to different individuals. So there are two key findings from the algorithmic fairness literature that we want to highlight. The first one is that counterintuitively, to train fair AI models, we need to have data on the very fields that we don't want to discriminate on, such as gender or race. This is typically known as sensitive attributes in the literature. We note that this conflicts with existing data privacy laws and general consensus about data privacy, which says that we shouldn't collect such fields when they are not necessary. The problem is that the models need to know and need to have access to these fields in order to understand and to learn how to not discriminate along these fields in the first place. And so there is a tension there between what's found in algorithmic fairness and our existing data privacy and data collection laws. Second, there are many different definitions of fairness. And well, this is not new because many philosophers would have told you that a long time ago. The problem here is that they are also not mathematically compatible with each other, which means that when we are trying to optimize for fairness, when we're trying to include fairness as a constraint in our AI algorithms, we don't just need to say fairness. We need to tell them what kind of fairness, what variety of fairness are you interested in designing into the algorithm itself. This raises questions when today we see private companies and stakeholders deciding on different definitions of fairness to apply for themselves. And we may be concerned about that, given that different definitions of fairness can yield different results of whether or not a particular algorithm is fair.
Thanks, Shaun. Bearing in mind the two key findings from the field of algorithmic fairness, the next question that arises is whether our existing legal and regulatory landscapes can adequately regulate AI decision-making. For this lightning talk, we'll focus on three main areas and two jurisdictions. First up, what do laws currently say about collecting data on sensitive personal attributes? In Singapore, there are certain requirements under the Personal Data Protection Act to collect such data. For instance, the individual must have given or be deemed to have given his or her consent to the collection of his or her personal data. Further, if we look at what's happening in practice, organizations are urged not to collect such sensitive personal data, for instance, in the employment and financial fields. The understanding behind this is that only sensitive attributes that are relevant to the decision that is being made can justifiably be used as inputs. Otherwise, such data should simply not be collected or used. This approach may cause difficulties in assessing algorithmic bias and in developing fair AI models, as explained by Shaun earlier. Similarly, if we turn and look at the landscape in the EU, the General Data Protection Regulation also prohibits the processing of certain personal data with some stipulated exceptions. However, it is unclear if any of these exceptions will apply to allow AI systems to collect data on sensitive attributes. Turning then to the next area, what does the regulatory landscape currently look like for AI fairness? In Singapore, we've decided to take a collaborative approach to regulating AI with voluntary frameworks and guiding principles put in place. For instance, the model framework is an example of a framework that was co-created by the PDPC and industry players to guide industry players on certain good standards to adopt in AI decision making. Hence, the short answer is that there are no laws addressing AI fairness, but there are these non-binding guidelines and frameworks that are being put in place together by government regulatory authorities and industry players. However, there is some limited discussion on the different fairness definitions. In the white paper released in February 2022 by the Veritas Consortium, which is formed by the Monetary Authority of Singapore and financial industry players, there's a focus on articulating a fairness assessment methodology. The white paper further suggests a framework for companies to determine the appropriate fairness metric for their financial products. Such discussions are a step in the right direction and should be encouraged. In contrast to a collaborative approach, the EU has adopted a stricter rules-based approach to regulating AI. The European Commission had released a draft AI regulation in April 2021, which establishes a risk-based framework to regulating AI systems. However, there's no mention of algorithmic fairness in the regulations. There has also been some sporadic discussion about AI fairness, for instance, in a paper written for the European Parliament, but all in all, more discourse on the different definition of fairness and appreciating the implications of such different definitions should be encouraged. Finally, can existing anti-discrimination laws be applied to AI systems to detect bias? In Singapore, there are upcoming plans to legislate a workplace anti-discrimination law. Hence, we'll have to wait and see what shape and form this law takes and whether it can effectively regulate bias and discrimination in AI systems. In the EU, there are already existing anti-discrimination laws. However, these are not well suited to regulate algorithmic discrimination, as they are either unlikely to arise in decisions made by AI systems, or there are difficulties in applying the concepts to AI systems.
So with some of the understanding of algorithmic fairness and our understanding of the current regulatory and legal landscape for AI governance and AI fairness, here are some proposals that we will encourage our audience to think more about. The first one is to consider deconflicting privacy regulations from AI governance. And this really comes from the finding that AI models require access to the sensitive attributes like race and gender in order to identify how it's being biased, to measure that, and to be able to train models that are explicitly fair, which means that they don't discriminate along these sensitive attributes. This is something that's going to take a while because the current landscape for data privacy and data collection is about data minimization, which is to collect as little data about these sensitive attributes as possible. The second proposal is to articulate clear fairness definitions and to be clear about these standards for specific industries, especially for those that are particularly at risk or have an outsized impact on individuals' access to socio-economic opportunities. This is important because it might not be a good idea to leave it up to individual companies to decide what kind of definitions they want to impose for themselves, as well as the standards and the thresholds that they want to be subject to. At the end of the day, it's important for everybody to come together to agree on what fairness means and what kind of standards we all equally think are feasible as well as meaningful for the average person. The last one is to encourage interdisciplinary dialogue, and that's to bring together practitioners and academics from a whole host of different fields, from technology, from computer science, from the legal space, as well as philosophy, sociology, and many other disciplines in order to have a fuller discussion about what fairness in AI means and how we can best tackle it in modern society. So this was a lightning talk, and as the name implies, we went through the ideas very, very quickly. So for those of you who are interested in kind of reading more about what our ideas are like, what algorithmic fairness is, what the regulatory landscape is like, and with more details about our proposals, we'd like to ask you to read our forthcoming article titled Algorithmic Fairness, Challenges and Opportunities for Artificial Intelligence Governance. This will be published in the 2022 Singapore Academy of Law Journal special issue on artificial intelligence and data governance. With that, thank you very much for listening to our lightning talk, and we hope you have a great STAC 2022 conference.